Honey, the word moving through the industry right now is that the game just found out, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that Kendrick Lamar has not spoken a single word to him in over 2 years. And it is not because Kendrick is busy. It is not because Kendrick is private. It is because Kendrick Lamar allegedly made a decision a long time ago that Game was never going to be part of his circle. And the reason why goes all the way back to one video shoot in Compton that changed absolutely everything. And listen, what insiders are now putting out there is that this is not a misunderstanding. This is not two brothers from the same city who lost touch. Reportedly, this was a verdict. Kendrick watched one specific move Game made, decided it told him everything he needed to know about the man, and quietly closed a door that Game has been banging on ever since. And the wildest part? Game apparently still does not fully understand what he did wrong. He is on stages, on live streams, in comment sections, asking the same question over and over like a man standing outside a house where the lights are on and nobody is coming to the door. Now, before we get into all of it, because this story has layers on layers, and I am going to lay every single one of them out. Quick word for anybody out here trying to get their money right while all this rap drama is unfolding. I have been rocking with Current, and there is a reason they are sponsoring this one. Current is an online banking app where you can get up to a $750 paycheck advance if you qualify. Their build card can help you add up to 80 points to your credit score in about 6 months if you handle it the right way. You have got fee-free overdraft. You can get paid up to 2 days early when you switch your direct deposit over. You can earn up to 4% on a savings pod. And there is 24/7 live support when you need an actual human being. And right now they are giving $75 in cash to anybody who signs up through my QR code or my link, finishes the setup, orders their card, and switches over their direct deposit. If money has been tight, if payday feels like it is 3 weeks away instead of 1, do not stress it. Current was literally built for that. The link is waiting on you. Alright, bet. Now back to the mess, because honey, it is deep. So if you have been paying even a little bit of attention over these past 2 years, you already know Game has been carrying on this strange, one-sided, very public situationship with Kendrick Lamar. And I say one-sided because Kendrick has never once, not a single time, responded. Not a verse, not a post, not a like, nothing. And from what insiders are saying, that silence is exactly what has been eating Game alive. Because just recently, reportedly as recent as this past week, Game got on a stage in Los Angeles and went on an emotional tangent in front of a whole crowd. And underneath all the shouting, the entire rant boiled down to one wounded question. Why won't Kendrick talk to me? And look at what he said up there, because the words matter. He got on that mic and started listing his losses. He talked about his dead homies. He said he has no grandparents left. He said his father is gone and his mother is sick. He shouted out where he is from. The West Side, Cedar Block, Compton, and he swore on his mother that he would never turn his back on the city, and that when he dies, he is going to be buried where he is from. He told that crowd it is West Side with him, today or 10 years from now. And then, right in the middle of it, he called for a bottle to be brought out on stage. Now, I need you to sit with that image for a second, because it tells you almost everything. A man in his mid-40s, on stage, pouring out grief and pride and loyalty all mixed together, asking for a bottle, while somewhere across the same city the biggest rapper alive, a man from the same soil, will not pick up the phone. You do not have to hate Game to feel the ache in that picture. But you also do not have to love him to ask the obvious follow-up. What did he do? Because honey, there is always a what did he do? And according to the people who were actually inside these rooms, the answer is not one thing. It is a pattern. A long, documented, 20-year pattern. And the man who has been laying that pattern out piece by piece is somebody who knows Game personally. Somebody who has apparently spent hours on the phone with him talking him off ledges. Stat Quo. Now if you do not know Stat Quo, here is all you need to know. He was signed to Shady and Aftermath back when Game was coming up under that same roof. He has been in the studios, on the tours, in the meetings, and lately he has been having very candid public conversations about the Game, Kendrick, and TD dynamic. And according to Stat Quo, the conversation that explains everything started with a phone call. A call where he was told, in no uncertain terms, that when these clips and conversations started circulating, the whole story had to come with them. Because the powers that be did not want it looking like Kendrick just stopped talking to Game out of nowhere, for no reason, like some diva move. There was a reason. And the reason, reportedly, has a name, the 100 video. Let me lay this out, because this is the hinge the whole door swings on. Back when Drake and Game did the 100 video, they shot parts of it in Compton, in the hood, on Game's turf. And at the time, that probably looked like nothing more than two artists shooting a music video. But here is where context becomes everything. Because if you go back and actually read what Kendrick was saying about Drake and his music around that whole era, the accusation was never just about rap skills. The accusation was that Drake was a culture vulture, a man who dips into other people's cities, other people's slang, other people's sounds, collects the credibility, and flies back home. That was the charge Kendrick had been laying at Drake's feet for years, long before any formal beef, in ways that only people paying close attention caught. And understand something about the geography here, because people who are not from Los Angeles miss this part. Compton is not just a backdrop in this story, it is the whole argument. Every artist who comes out of that city carries it like a deed, like paperwork, like proof of authenticity that can never be repossessed. Game's entire legend is built on it. The block he named in every interview, the sets he claimed, the mixtapes sold out of the swap meet, the debut album that made the whole country learn the names of Compton streets they had never driven down. Kendrick's entire art is built on it too. The good kid trapped in the mad city, the butterfly that came back home. So when a conflict between these two men involves who gets to bring an outsider onto that soil, it is not celebrity gossip anymore. It is a dispute over the meaning of home. It is a border dispute disguised as a video shoot. So now put yourself in Kendrick's position for 1 second. You are from Compton. Your entire identity, your entire art, is built on the authenticity of that city. And one of the biggest figures from your city, a man you looked up to, a man whose posters were essentially on your wall as a kid, personally escorts the alleged culture vulture into Compton to shoot his video, walks him around the hood, stamps him, gives him the pass. From the inside looking out, that is just Game doing a video with a collaborator. From Kendrick's side of the fence, insiders say, that was the moment respect quietly died. Not announced, not argued about, just withdrawn. And honey, when people from that world withdraw respect, they do not send a memo. They send silence. And here is the detail that makes it worse. Because it is never just one thing with Game, it is the accumulation. During that same stretch of years, there was the J-Roc video situation. Reportedly, some of the younger TD-affiliated artists went over to Game's house to shoot their part, and Game put on a mask, zipped a hoodie all the way up, obscuring his face, and the explanation floating around was that a label or somebody had said he could not show his face. But then, according to the people keeping receipts, barely 2 weeks later he turned around and did a whole Hurricane Chris video. Face fully visible, no mask, no problem. Now is that the crime of the century? Of course not. But in a world that runs on respect and consistency, in a city where every gesture gets read like scripture, little moments like that get filed away. And they add up. Every single one of them gets stamped and stored. Now, to be fair, and I am going to be fair, because this story deserves honesty in both directions, Game has an explanation for the hoodie. According to Stat Quo, who says he got this directly, Game's position is that he got paid $10,000 to wear that hoodie zipped up. It was a paid placement. A business decision. And Game apparently wants people to know that, because he feels like folks have been holding a grudge over something that was really just a check. And listen, I am going to tell you the truth the way the streets heard it, not the way Game wishes they heard it. Nobody cares about the $10,000. I understand the logic. A check is a check, and 10 bands to zip up a hoodie is not money you turn down. But when you are dealing with a community that reads loyalty and body language before it reads anything in a bank statement, telling people, I did it for the money, is not the defense he thinks it is. Because the follow-up question writes itself. So your face, in your own city, next to the younger artists coming up under the same flag, that had a price? That is the part that lands wrong. That is the part no invoice can fix. And I say that with no hatred in my heart for the man, because we are going to get to his side of all of this, I promise you. But actions have reactions. That is the whole theme of this story, so write it down now. Because the pattern does not start with Kendrick, and it does not start with Drake. To understand why Kendrick Lamar would feel completely comfortable never speaking to the Game again, you have to go back to the man who made Game famous and the war that defined an entire era, 50 Cent. Now the younger folks might not know the full extent of this, so let me lay it out. Game came up under 50 Cent and Drive Dre, through G-Unit and Aftermath. And here is a piece of history that does not get discussed enough. 50 Cent himself has said, on record, in interviews, that Game was about to be dropped from Aftermath and Interscope before he got involved. According to 50, the creative process had stalled out. His words were that the tires were stuck in the mud. And 50 says he stepped in and recorded 6 records on Game's debut album, and he named them West Side Story, How We Do, Hate It or Love It, Church for Thugs, Special, and Higher. And then, according to 50, Game came back from overseas once the record started selling and got disrespectful, acting brand new, and 50's position was, I wrote those records. I created that moment. Now whether you believe every word of that or not, that is the origin story of the beef. a mentorship that curdled into a war. And what a war it was. This was not subliminals and interview shade. One of Game's associates got shot in front of Hot 97. There was real blood in the streets behind this. The diss records were industrial in scale. Game launched the whole G-Unit campaign. Hundreds of bars aimed at 50 and the entire G-Unit roster. Mixtape after mixtape. To the point where if you stacked every bar Game has ever directed at 50 Cent over the years, people joked it would be in the thousands. He was a master of trolling before trolling was a marketing strategy. There was even the infamous stunt where they were supposedly going to shoot footage at 50's house. Game built an entire second identity out of being the one man against the whole army. And then, because this is Game, and with Game the wheel always comes back around, they made peace. First in 2005, the famous press conference, the handshake, the front page of the paper, all of it. Remember what that moment took. This was months removed from a man connected to his camp being shot outside a radio station, and their Game was, standing next to 50, smiling for cameras, talking about unity and giving money to charity like the whole thing had been a misunderstanding between brothers. And then again years later, around 2016, when the two of them ended up in the same strip club in Los Angeles, Ace of Diamonds, and buried the hatchet all over again in the VIP section. The blogs ate it up. The footage went everywhere. Two of the most stubborn men in the history of the genre, hugging it out between the bar and the stage, and everybody who covered it said the same thing. This time it might actually be real. Game grabbed the mic in the club that night and addressed the whole room. He told everybody it was done. He said nobody had to pick a side anymore. He said he felt no type of way, and that what happened was 12 years ago. 12 years ago. Remember that phrase. Hold on to it. Because it is about to matter. Because here is where Game's own history starts arguing against Game's current case. Fast forward from that peace summit. Years after all the G-Unit mixtapes, after the shooting outside Hot 97, after 300 bars and running, after the strip club truce where Game himself declared it all ancient history, Kendrick Lamar does a song connected to 50 Cent's show Power. Kendrick, working with 50, who is Game's most famous enemy. And Game's public position, delivered through Stat Quo, is that he did not feel any type of way about it, that he was fine with it, that he enjoyed it. And therefore, Game argues, Kendrick should not have a problem with him doing a video with Drake, because he did not have a problem when Kendrick linked with 50. Now on the surface, that sounds reasonable. That sounds like a man being consistent. But baby, when you actually examine it for more than 10 seconds, the whole argument collapses under its own weight, for two reasons. Reason number one, by Game's own public declaration, in that club, on that microphone, in front of the whole world, the 50 beef was over. Dead. 12 years ago, he said. He told the room nobody had to pick a side. So when Kendrick works with 50 Cent years later, he is not working with Game's enemy. He is working with Game's reconciled former rival, a man Game had publicly hugged in the VIP section. There is no betrayal to forgive because there was no war anymore. Meanwhile, and this is the crucial asymmetry, when Game brought Drake to Compton, the Kendrick-Drake tension was not ancient history. It was active, it was personal, it was cultural, and Game of all people knew exactly what the accusations against Drake were, because the whole industry had been hearing them for years. Forgiving a collaboration with a man you made peace with is not the same as escorting a man who stands accused of vulturing your city's culture into the heart of that city. One is a footnote. The other is a statement. And everybody inside that culture knows the difference, even if the internet pretends not to. Reason number two, and this is the one that really tells on the whole situation. Stat Quo has basically admitted that the stories keep shifting. The claims that Game tried to sign Kendrick early on have been debunked by just about everybody who was actually around at the time. And now there is a new grievance every few months, a new reason why Game is owed something, a new slight that nobody else can find. As Stat more or less put it, it is starting to feel like the man is making it up as he goes along. And before we move on, notice what Stat Quo has really been doing across all of these conversations, because it is easy to miss. He is not just gossiping. Every time he sits down in front of a camera, he is running a quiet rescue mission, explaining Game to the world in language the world will accept, translating the rants into grievances, the grievances into history, the history into something almost sympathetic. He is doing, publicly and for free, the exact kind of reputation management that Game refuses to pay attention to privately. He admitted it himself, on camera, laughing about it. I am his conscience. I am the one stopping him. Which raises the uncomfortable question that hangs over this whole saga. What does the man do on the days his conscience is not on the phone? And based on the timeline, the Ross diss that came right after a conversation where he was told to stand down, we already know the answer. And honey, that is the part of this story that actually makes me a little sad, and I mean that sincerely. Because if you have followed Game's whole career, you know that underneath all the chaos, there is a real artist in there, and, by many accounts, a man who genuinely loves his city and genuinely means well more often than people give him credit for. But somewhere along the line, the pattern swallowed the person. Remember the Nipsey story? After Nipsey Hussle passed, Game would tell this story about looking up at the sky, seeing a plane cut through the blue, and thinking about Nip. And it was touching the first time. Maybe even the second. But he told it so many times, in so many interviews, with the same cadence and the same imagery, that the internet turned it into a meme. People started writing parody versions. And that is a brutal thing to watch happen to a man, because the sentiment was probably real every single time he said it. But repetition without self-awareness turned genuine grief into a punchline, and he never seemed to notice the room changing. And that, right there, is the whole tragedy in miniature. The room changes, and Game does not change with it. The rules of respect in 2005 are not the rules of respect now. In 2005, going at everybody, name-dropping Jay-Z, warring with 50, dissing whoever, whenever, that was a marketing plan, and honestly it worked. It made him one of the most talked-about rappers alive. But in this era, the constant swinging reads differently. It reads as instability. And the worst part is, Game once said it himself, years ago, in a moment of rare public vulnerability. He said he felt homeless in hip-hop, that he had no home, that nobody would stand next to him. And the heartbreaking thing is, he said it like it was something that happened to him, when so much of it was something he built, brick by brick, diss by diss, rant by rant. You cannot spend 20 years being the man who will go off on anybody at any time and then act confused when everybody keeps their distance. The distance is not a mystery. The distance is the receipt. Now, and this is important, because I do not want anybody thinking this is a pile-on. Stat Quo has actually been in Game's corner through all of this. By his own account, he is basically Game's conscience. He says he has spent hours on the phone with the man. And the stories he tells about those phone calls are genuinely revealing, because they show you exactly how Game's mind works when it comes to Kendrick. According to Stat, when Kendrick opened Not Like Us with the line, "I see dead people," Game genuinely believed it was a subliminal shot at him, because Game had used a similar phrase on one of his own records years earlier, a record Dre had a hand in. Think about that. The biggest diss record of the decade, aimed squarely at Drake, and Game's first instinct was that the opening line was about him. Stat says he spent over an hour on the phone convincing Game that Kendrick was not dissing him. An hour. And this was not an isolated incident. According to Stat, when Kendrick dropped the Heart installment where he addressed other rappers, Game asked again, "Is he dissing me in that one?" And Stat says he actually went to Kendrick about it, and Kendrick's response was immediate and genuine. "Man, I would never diss him. What is he talking about?" Now, you can hear that story two ways. You can hear it as proof that Kendrick respects Game and there is no beef. Or you can hear it the way I hear it. As a man so starved for a signal from Kendrick that he is reading himself into lines that were never about him, like somebody searching a silence for any echo of their own name. And the silence from Kendrick's side has a very specific explanation, which insiders have been spelling out for anyone who will listen. Kendrick Lamar does not get on the phone with people. Period. It is not personal. According to the people who know him, Kendrick talks to a tiny circle, a handful of people, and that is it. His circle says that is his vice, his one luxury. The ability to cut the whole world off and be unreachable. Some people shop. Some people drink. Kendrick disappears. And he apparently loves that nobody can get to him. And look at who raised him, musically speaking. Dr. Dre is the exact same way. Famously unreachable. A ninja. A man who can cut access to anyone at any time. Cannot be called. Cannot be pulled up on. Cannot be found unless he wants to be found. Eminem moves the same way. That whole Aftermath lineage treats access like the most expensive currency on earth. And Game, who came up through that exact same house, who watched Dre operate that way for 2 decades, somehow cannot accept that Kendrick inherited the same gate. As the insiders put it, Game feels that because he was one of Kendrick's inspirations, he should have permanent access. He feels like his contribution to the culture earned him a key to a door that, in reality, has maybe 4 keys total, and his name was never on one. And was he an inspiration? Absolutely. And here is the part that makes all of this genuinely poignant, because Kendrick has paid that respect publicly, in his art, in a way that cannot be faked. Go back to Black Boy Fly. Kendrick has a whole verse about being young in Compton, mowing lawns, hearing the people roar for the game in 2004, watching the mixtape sell out at the swap meet, seeing this tall dude hop out with Jordans and a white tank top, top of the rap game, top of the block, and having mixed feelings about it. Jealousy, admiration, ambition, all tangled together. That is one of the most famous verses of Kendrick's early career, and it is, functionally, a love letter and a complicated tribute to Game at the same time. Kendrick put Game in the museum of his own story, on wax, forever, and Game knows this, which is exactly why the silence hurts him so much, because it is not coming from a stranger. It is coming from the little brother who wrote about him, who stood on stages with him, who was there the night the city passed the torch. Oh, and we have to talk about that night. Because according to people in TD's orbit, folks who were actually in the building the night everybody got on stage and essentially crowned Kendrick, the night the whole city watched the torch get passed, the night Kendrick was reportedly up there emotional, feeling the love of all his big homies. Not everybody on that stage was feeling the moment the same way. The suggestion, and it has been floated carefully by people who were there, is that when Game stood on that stage, he might not have been entirely on board with what was happening. That a man who held the city on his back at one point was watching the crown get placed on somebody else's head, and something in that moment did not sit right. Now, is that jealousy? Is that just the complicated grief of a veteran watching his era end? I do not know, and honestly, neither do the people speculating. But the people in that camp noticed something, and they filed it away, the same way they filed away the hoodie, the same way they filed away the video shoot. That is what nobody tells you about that world. There is no single betrayal. There is just a file folder that gets thicker every year, until one day somebody closes it and stops taking your calls. And Game, to his credit or his detriment, depending on how you see it, is constitutionally incapable of not responding to a closed door. This is a man who, according to Stat Quo himself, was literally in a bathroom arguing about whether he should be dissing people. This was at some conference event, and Stat is telling him, "I told you not to diss anybody. I told you not to say anything." And Game's defense is basically, "Well, you told me not to say anything about Kendrick." And Stat's answer is the answer of a tired friend, because he was not dissing you, man. And then what happens? Game goes and disses Rick Ross anyway, jumping into a beef that had nothing to do with him, taking Drake's side against Ross. The conscience says don't shoot. Game shoots. Every time. It is like a reflex with no off switch. And let me add one more layer to that bathroom story, because it shows you the machinery at work. This is not a man surrounded by people telling him to chill who never gets warned. He gets warned constantly. By Stat. By Wack. By everybody in his orbit. Wack 100, his own manager, has been in the middle of these conversations for years, trying to steer the ship away from the icebergs. And the reports say half these messages get relayed through him precisely because the people Game wants to reach will not take the direct call. Think about how that must feel. By the way, your own manager functioning as a courier between you and a rapper who came up watching you. So the information reaches Game. The warnings reach Game. The context reaches Game. And the conduct never changes. That is not a man who lacks good counsel. That is a man who hears good counsel and files it under things to ignore. So now we get to the question everybody actually wants answered. Why wasn't Game at the pop-out? When Kendrick threw the biggest West Coast unity event in a generation, the Juneteenth concert that had everybody from every set and every era on one stage, where was the man who once carried the city? And the honest answer, according to the people who know, is almost more brutal than an official snub. It was not that type of relationship. There was no formal blacklist, no security guard with a photo. There was just no invitation, because invitations to that stage ran through relationships, and the relationship was not there. And everybody understood one of the big reasons why. Game had picked a side in the biggest rap war of the decade, and the side he picked was Drake's. He defended Drake. He dissed Ross for going at Drake. He was publicly, vocally riding with the man Kendrick had just dismantled in front of the entire world. You do not get to carry somebody's flag in a war, and then act shocked that the other army did not save you a seat at the victory dinner. And what has Game's response been to all of this? A comment under somebody's post that I want to read to you carefully, because it is doing a lot of work. At least one person gets it. Fans and internet goofies will never get it. These dudes are never who you think they are. One day I'm going to pull the curtain down so you can see every clown in their circus. The curtain, the clowns, the circus. And listen, I have met Game a couple of times, interviewed him, and I am telling you from that limited but real experience, the man is cool in person, charismatic, sharp. But this right here, this comment, this is the whole problem in one paragraph. Because the implication is that there is some grand hidden truth, some conspiracy of fake people, some circus full of clowns that only Game can see. But baby, and I say this with love, what if it is simpler than that? What if there is no curtain? What if there is just a list of choices and consequences that took their time arriving? You brought Drake to the hood. That was your right. That is your friend. And a man can stand with whoever he wants to stand with. But you do not get to make the move and then be exempt from what the move means. That is not how the city works. That is not how any community works. Accountability is not a circus, and the people reacting to your choices are not clowns. And one more thing about that comment, because the timing of it matters. That comment did not appear in a vacuum. It appeared in the middle of a stretch where, musically, Game had actually been earning goodwill back. The mixtape he put together with DJ Drama recently. People in this very community covered it, saluted it, called it a solid project from a veteran who can still wrap circles around most of the active roster. The conversation around him was finally tilting back toward the music. And then, right on schedule, came the tangent, the rant, the cryptic comment about curtains and clowns. And just like that, the conversation snapped back to the drama. It is the most reliable cycle in his entire career. The music builds the bridge, and the mouth burns it down. Every single time. Like clockwork. And at some point you stop asking why people keep their distance and start asking how he keeps finding new ways to give them reasons. And I need to be fair here one more time before we get to where this is all heading, because Game does have a case, and it is not nothing. His case, delivered through Stat, goes like this. If I held grudges the way people hold grudges against me, where would the West Coast be? There was a time when I was the only one out here carrying this. When he stepped back at certain events and did not turn them into spectacles. When he could have been himself, loud and disrespectful and dominant. He says he did it for brotherhood, for the look of unity, because his mama told him to, because it was a good look for the whole city. He says nobody can touch him lyrically, period, and that when the lists come out and his name is missing, it does not bother him, because he went up against the biggest names in the history of the genre, and he is still here, still rapping, still walking around, still living his life. And on the talent point, he is not wrong, and I will not pretend otherwise. Bar for bar, Game is one of the best to ever do it, and that is not fan talk, that is just craft. If you need somebody to rap from sunup to sundown and never run out of ammunition, you go get Game. He has never once disappointed as a pure rapper. But here is the distinction he refuses to make, the one that explains everything. The culture is not rejecting his bars. The culture is exhausted by his conduct. Those are two different verdicts, and he keeps answering the first accusation when everybody is making the second one. When he says he went up against Jay-Z, did he though? He said Jay's name a bunch of times, and Jay answered once, essentially flicking him off like lint, saying Game was playing childish games with grown men, and that was the entire feud. One man swinging at a mountain. And that is the pattern. The wars Game remembers as legendary clashes, the other side often remembers as noise. Over time, that constant swinging stopped being feared and started being background static. Oh, Game is dissing somebody again. Oh, Game is in his feelings again. And when your outrage becomes background static, you have lost the only currency that ever mattered in that world, the belief that when you speak, it means something. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a 40-something-year-old legend on a stage in the city he loves, asking for a bottle, listing his dead, swearing loyalty to soil that raised him, while the biggest artist that soil ever produced will not text him back. It leaves us with a man whose conscience, Stat Quo, is doing interviews explaining Game's feelings to the world because the person Game actually wants to explain them to has made himself unreachable, and whose whole artistic lineage, from Dre to M to Kendrick, treats unreachability as the ultimate power move. Game came up in a house where the masters of the craft were also masters of the disappearing act, and he never learned the trick. He only learned to knock louder. And now the rumor mill is churning with the next chapter. People close to Game's camp are teasing that music is coming, that a response is loading, that the diss record might actually materialize. And maybe it will. A Kendrick diss from Game would be the biggest moment of his last 10 years, and part of me thinks he knows that, and part of me thinks that is exactly what this is. But if the people around Kendrick are telling the truth about who he is, a man whose greatest pleasure is that he cannot be reached, then Game could drop the best diss record of his life, and the response would be the same thing it has been for 2 years. Silence. Deafening, unbothered, unreachable silence. Imagine winning the loudest moment of your career and your opponent's answer is a closed door. What does round 2 even look like when only one man is in the ring? So now I am handing it to you, because this one genuinely splits the room. Question 1. Is Kendrick justified? Did the Compton video shoot really cross a line that could never be uncrossed? Or is freezing out a man who helped put your city on the map an overreaction dressed up as principal? Question 2. Is Game a legend being disrespected by the little brother he inspired? Or is this 20 years of burned bridges finally sending one invoice? And question 3, the one I really want answered. If that diss record actually drops, does Kendrick break his silence and respond? Or does he let the door stay closed and win the war the way he apparently wins everything, by not showing up to it? Sound off in the comments, because I read every single one, And the last time we covered this story, y'all called half of what is happening right now before it happened. The West Coast has not seen a wound like this in a long time. Two sons of the same city, one holding a mic, the other holding a grudge made of pure quiet. And something tells me this story is nowhere near finished. So keep your notifications close, because the moment this moves, we are moving with it. And one last thing before you go, because it ties the whole story together. Kendrick once wrote that he used to be jealous of game. Jealous, standing on a lawn, watching his hero hop out of a truck on top of the world. 20 years later, the man he was jealous of is standing on a stage asking why nobody calls. That is not just a rap story, honey. That is a story about time and pride and what happens when a king outlives the version of the kingdom that crowned him. I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace.